All right. So tonight is Convergence of Prophecy. And the title of this study tonight is The End of American Dominance. So our study tonight is going to ask a question. Is America's dominance beginning to wane? Could we find ourselves on the sidelines in a global conflict that is yet to happen, but we know from the Bible in Ezekiel 38 is going to happen when Russia, Iran, and Turkey, and supporting global Muslim nations, rather, attack Israel, right? So the answer to that question seems to be yes. America does not seem to be mentioned in the end times prophecy, except possibly in this verse in Ezekiel 38:13. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all its leaders will say to you, have you come to seize spoil? Have you assembled your host to carry off plunder, to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, to seize great spoil? So one of the greatest questions in Bible prophecy is why the United States seems to be absent from the major end times conflicts that we read in the Bible. Ezekiel 38:13 tells us that Sheba, Dedan, and Tarshish and their leaders, now that word leaders in some of your translations, in Hebrew is also translated young lions, right? So you have to note that the phrase for young lions in Hebrew is kepher, and that often symbolizes powerful rulers or leaders. And where this gets a little confusing is some of your translations actually say villages, right? Not leaders, not young lions. It says villages. The Hebrew root word for kafar means village. Kafar and kefir, I know it's a little confusing, share a root meaning to cover, like a lion is covered in a mane or a village is covered by walls. So it's the same root word. The proper translation, however, is leaders, and young lions is derived from that. So an interesting note, the animal kingdom, young male lions are forced to leave the pride that they were born into at the age of 2 or 3 years old. They're forced out by the dominant male lion to start and lead their own pride, right? So young lions represent nations descended or kicked out of Great Britain, let's say, right, as a matter of speaking. And those three countries that came from Great Britain, from England, are the United States, Canada, and Australia. Out of those three, only one decided to break free from the dominant lion, which is England, and that, of course, is America. So America seems to be in this prophecy serving as an observer of the conflict and just questioning why there's an invading coalition rather than intervening militarily. And there may be a lot of reasons why we're not intervening militarily, which we're going to look at tonight. So many evangelical prophecy scholars suggest Sheba and Dedan represent Saudi Arabia and the Gulf nations. Tarshish is Great Britain. And if that interpretation is correct, Scripture presents these nations as offering only a verbal protest. They're only crying out against this invasion, right? And perhaps they're even issuing a letter of protest or a letter of complaint in the UN General Assembly. And so they may be formally condemning this action as a violation of sovereignty of Israel or a breach of international law by another nation, but that's about as far as it goes, about as strict as it goes. There's no military intervention. So the bottom line is that no nation comes to the aid of Israel during its attack, and God himself supernaturally delivers Israel. And you read that in Ezekiel 38:39. So as students of Bible prophecy, we need to recognize that Jesus rebuked the Pharisees for not knowing the time of his coming, right? In Matthew 16, verses 2 and 3, we read, he answered them, when it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. But he also commanded us as believers to be aware of the signs of the times. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake, would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. Matthew 24, verses 42 through 44. So we always have to bear in mind that God is the only one that knows the exact timing of Jesus' return. And all the current geopolitical and all the technological developments should never replace what we know in Scripture. However, when we see all these things converging together, right, that's why we do Convergence of Prophecy, it helps us understand that the world appears to be moving toward the rise of the Antichrist, toward the tribulation, and ultimately the return of Jesus. And that's why we keep an eye on these things. So this study is going to examine tonight one particular global threat that may indicate, well, I don't think may indicate is a good, it does indicate, I believe, a gradual shift from American dominance in the world toward a globally dominated world. And that one thing we're going to focus on tonight is GPS. Who would have ever thought, right? GPS, or Global Positioning System. We all have it. It's on our phones. When I ride with Pastor Les, I use LPS. That's less positioning system, because he always tells me where to turn, when to turn, whether I need to know or not. But we need to begin this study with a little history of GPS. So we're gonna, it's something that we're all accustomed to, but we take for granted. I don't think anybody in this room, I didn't know where it even came from. I just knew growing up. Anybody here have a TomTom? Yeah. So now those have been replaced by our phones, obviously. But GPS, of course, is Global Positioning System. It's satellite-based navigation, and it provides networks with location information, which helps us to find where we're going. And it provides a vital role in real-time tracking, which sends instant location alerts to your phone, tablet, or computer, right? So where all that began was in 1960s, when the United States began to experiment with a satellite navigation system. And they used it to monitor where submarines were that carried missiles. And it was so successful that they decided to expand the program in 1978 by sending up 24 satellites to support a more advanced navigation system. So for almost 20 years, GPS was available only to the military. They were the only ones that used it, due to a program called selective availability. Anyway, I don't know what that is, and it really doesn't make a difference, because in May of 2000, Bill Clinton directed the United States government to do away with selective availability in order to provide GPS for civil and commercial users worldwide. So the world now has been using GPS up until a few years ago. United States GPS service was the dominant world tracking system until China launched its own satellite system called Beidou. And Beidou was launched in May of 2020. And so upon deployment, this system began rivaling the Russia's satellite system, which is called GLONASS, and that was launched in 2019. And as you're going to learn this evening, China's Beidou system is superior to any other system in the world, including the United States. So it is poised right now, as of this evening, to become the world's most dominant tracking program. Losing GPS dominance is going to erode America's geopolitical soft and hard power. And we're going to talk about that a little further down the line. Donald Trump is probably one of the most, he's probably the best person at handling the hard power end of this. You see him threatening Iran, right? You see him threatening other countries. Well, we could do that because we had dominance in that field. We literally could strike you at any time, and there was literally nothing you could do about it, because not only could we strike you with precision strikes, but we could jam your signal from picking up our invasion. Well, we don't have that ability any longer, or at least let me say, we are not dominant in that field any longer. And so that could weaken our economy. It could weaken our critical infrastructure, while allowing rivals like China to gain strategic and military edge because they have a more advanced positioning system. So for us, this is a very dangerous position to be in, right? So here's some of the things that China could do. Listen, China's a communist country. They hate us. They might make nice with us. They might meet, the president and talk nice and have a big meal, but they hate us. They hate us with a passion. They like nothing more than to see our downfall. But by the way, the entire world would like nothing more than to see our downfall. They look at us as just arrogant. So here's some of the things that they could do with their GPS dominance: degrade or destroy our communication and reconnaissance satellites that the United States military relies on for coordination and for power projections, right? So they could actually destroy our satellites in the sky. Second, they could use a massive network of intelligence and surveillance satellites to track mobile targets in the U.S., like aircraft carriers and our aircraft, in real time, and carry out precision strikes against them, which they did recently to our bases, if you were reading the news, right? Satellite imagery of some of the damage that was done shows structures, equipment, hangars, barracks, fuel depots, warehouses damaged or destroyed from these precision strikes. They hit American interest in Kuwait, in Iraq, in Qatar. In Qatar, they hit an airbase. In Bahrain, that just happens to be the home of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. They hit Bahrain in Raifa and Isa also. And they hit Jordan today. So they've done some damage. Third, they could undermine American defense systems in the Indo-Pacific sector during regional crises, like a crisis over Taiwan, right? Here at home, they could disrupt or disable navigation. So if you got to go to Walmart and you don't know where Walmart is, you might wind up in Target. So they could interfere or completely eclipse our GPS system. They could cripple critical infrastructure by disrupting the timing signals that our power and electric grids communicate on. They could disrupt financial transactions. Hopefully, they wipe out all our debts. They could also dictate internet connectivity, right, and communication protocols by restricting it and holding it hostage. In other words, we've seen glitches in the internet. We've seen the internet go down. Who knows if it's not them testing out their ability to do that, right? So in a nutshell, China could bring the United States to its knees, and that certainly would make us a lot less arrogant than we have been. Yeah. Maybe we need a little humbling as a country. But right, what do you think those balloons that hovered over the United States all those weeks, what do you think they were doing? Surveillance. So to help you navigate through this, I want to read you an article from Space News. Space News. Who would ever thought we'd be reading pertinent information from an article called Space News? So the title of it is, America is losing its GPS dominance to China's Beidou SatNav. This was written in 2024. Well, this is a current article. In the 20th century, the United States vied with the Soviet Union for space supremacy, right? Back then, it was who's going to get to the moon first. Now, America has a different rival, China, and the key battle is already brewing in a critical area of satellite navigation. Right now, the United States is falling behind. This is 2 years ago. They've already outpaced us. So while GPS was once the undisputed king of SatNav and a key instrument of America's soft power, it now has a growing list of global navigation satellite system competitors. from China's Beidou to the EU's Galileo. Russia has GLONASS, and India has Navik. So all these countries are developing their own systems, but China is far and above all of them. And without question, it is a significant rival, comes from China, as the country is actively seeking to displace our GPS as the world's dominant sat-nav system. And in so doing, it will increase its own soft power influence on the nations that use it. So the National Space-Based Positioning, Navigation, and Timing Advisory Board, or we're just going to call it PNT for short, warned that GPS capabilities are now substantially inferior to those of China's Beidou, and urged that the United States regain PNT leadership over the next decade. It's going to take at least that long to catch up. And that's what we're doing. We're playing catch up. So while China and the EU have been investing heavily in their global navigation systems, the U.S. military has only made modest improvements in our GPS. Plus, we've had years of a government that wants to spend millions on gay frog research rather than protecting us from real threats like China's Beidou system. However, we are looking to currently replace our 1990 era GPS satellites with newer GPS-3 satellites. GPS-3 is not trailblazing technology. It's not. It's only slightly better than what we already have. It's only it's worse or less than even the Galileo system in the EU. So GPS-3 will eventually be followed by GPS-3F. I guess F is for failure, which is expected to provide additional capabilities such as a first completely digital navigation payload. However, GPS-3F won't be ready, if it's ready at all, until the mid-2030s. 2030s. You know what else might happen in the mid-2030s? Tribulation. I'm just saying, throwing it out there. I'm not setting any dates. I'm just throwing it out there. I want to take a pause for a minute here to remind you that China launched its Beidou system in what year? Anybody remember? 2020, right? 6 years later, they have a superior system to ours. 6 years. We've been rolling since 1960. Give them another 4 years, and I couldn't even imagine how much upgrades they're going to make to that system, how much further along China will be than the U.S. Our military's next PNT system, the next generation PNT system, is known as the NT-3, and it is still in the research and development phase. The first test satellite is scheduled to deploy somewhere this year, somewhere late this year. And it's unclear how long it's going to take for that to become fully operational. So Beidou's advantage over GPS. First of all, they have 56 satellites in the air, in the sky, compared to our 31. They have nearly twice as many as we do. It has over 10 times as many monitoring or ground relay stations, many of which are in developing nations. So, it's kind of like, remember windmills? When we went out to Canada, we saw windmills everywhere, windmill farms. And so they go to the farmers who are all struggling, right? And say, we'll pay you X amount of money to put this windmill on your property. Well, that's what China's doing. They're giving them all kinds of concessions for them to put these ground relay stations in their countries. So China's Beidou system has a critical advantage over our GPS. It has larger constellation, which offers greater PNT data availability, and in some cases, even greater accuracy in many areas of the world. So it's a more accurate system than ours. And so that's especially the case in underdeveloped areas like Africa and Southeast Asia, because they have been historically underserved by our GPS. Nobody cared about them. Well, China cares. China cares because it wants world dominance, and they're willing to put their ground relay systems in their countries. China also has an ambitious plan to enhance the Beidou's accuracy, security, and reliability even further, in part by launching low Earth orbit constellations and by implementing new inertial sensors and future technologies like quantum navigation. Maybe next week we'll have a class on quantum navigation. So, what's the risk to them becoming the supreme dominant nation with this GPS system, right? While the United States and the European Union work together on satellite navigation, and they are, China sees this as a race. It's a race for strategic geopolitical advantage, right? And right now they're winning the race. So, as noted, multiple international affairs organizations, Beidou is now a critical element of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to increase the country's soft power influence, technical leadership, and economic relationships across key regions to the detriment of its rivals. From the United States standpoint, China's so-called, well, they came up with a fancy term for it. Anybody remember what the Silk Road was? It was a trade route from China throughout, Western Europe. They call it the Space Silk Road, or it's a space information corridor. For us, it poses a significant risk because the primary concern is that it supplants our system. And I think it's already on the way of doing that. That it becomes the dominant global sat-nav system. And if it does, it's going to erode our political and economic influence in many areas. So establishing our global network system, establishing that dominance, will consolidate China's hold on global infrastructure, creating new, stronger dependencies on China, on their technology, on their infrastructure, on their service, and their diplomacy, right? So this Beidou integrated technology system becomes more embedded in a country like Africa or like Southeast Asia. It becomes more embedded in their infrastructure, in their economy, in everything. So China's influence in those areas is going to increase at the expense of the United States influence rather decreasing. Future diplomatic, trade, or military disputes with all these countries, it's just going to make them vulnerable to intimidation by China, which is not above intimidating other countries, just like it does Taiwan. So China could threaten in all these countries that have put their satellite systems in their, have used it and put their relay stations in. It could threaten to cut off access to vital service, which could have a significant impact on that country's sat-nav capabilities, especially if they're using China's multifunctional infrastructure. So the U.S. is already losing influence in key and strategic regions like Africa with China's Beidou system. So the U.S. is concerned that China could use this system as a platform for conducting espionage. Now, I don't think China would ever do that, do you? And this article even goes on to say, if you could believe it, that the satellite system itself is unlikely to be used this way. Okay. I have a bridge to sell you. A key part of this whole system that the Chinese are installing in these countries, it has a ground monitoring station. It's a ground monitoring station to monitor you, right? So it has continuous operating stations, especially in these developing countries. That's what they've installed to monitor, just like the balloons they flew over the United States, to monitor. So there's already 11 sub-Saharan nations that have received these reference stations, and there are 4 more ready to go online: Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Indonesia, and Myanmar. These ground-based systems and China's navigation receivers could potentially contain hidden tools that allow China to spy, to track users, to steal their data, to disrupt systems, and launch cyber attacks. Now, I know that China would never do that.
Yes, agreed to send Saudi Arabia a lot of missile systems.
I don't blame any country for looking at China and what they have to offer, because China is on the verge of becoming, I believe, the next superpower. And they're not anywhere near as magnanimous as the United States are. So you either get on board with them or else, right? So China's Beidou system is not matched by our GPS or any other service that we have to offer. And that's going to have, as I said, a significant impact on our global soft power and the U.S. role in setting standards and rulemaking for other emerging technologies. And so while we are desperately trying to upgrade our system, it is already at a distinct disadvantage in terms of that global PNT we talked about. And it soon could fall much further behind in overall accuracy, signal strength, and security. So while the US does have a number of growing commercial partners with LEO communication satellites in orbit, that could help, right? But that's also a disadvantage to us. Number one is the cost. It's going to cost us a boatload of money to partner with them. So unless we move quickly to prioritize our GPS systems, the balance of power could very easily shift toward China. And so that's the end of that article in the Space News. But it's a very dangerous geopolitical military crisis that we face. Make no mistake about it. Those ground referencing stations that we talked about, just to give you a little background on those, it's built at a precise known location, right? So it's constantly receiving signals from those navigation satellites, and it compares where the satellites say they are to where they actually are, which keeps them, even I have a watch, right? And my watch, I have an app on my phone for. The app on my phone sets that watch. So it's constantly knowing what time it is, and if the time is off, and it resets it. That's kind of what these things do. It's constantly monitoring those satellites, and if they're off only by, however, a few millimeters, it resets it. And so those stations know if there's any errors in those satellites, and it determines what the problems are, what it's caused by, and it corrects them. Those updates keep those satellite navigations accurate for everybody who rely on it. It's not going to fail like ours does sometimes. Those updates allow GPS, Galileo, Beidou, and GLONASS receivers around the world to calculate much more accurate positions. And by the way, if you have a iPhone is not set to use China's Beidou GPS system. It is not. However, if you're smart enough to own an Android, it will use it if it's in the area. But without them, the satellite clocks would slowly drift, orbit information would become less accurate, GPS errors would grow from a few feet to dozens of feet or even hundreds of feet over time. And that could be a problem for us if they start messing with our GPS system through their GPS system. So why is that important? Because precision applications like aircraft navigation, surveying, farming, autonomous vehicles, and military operations would suffer. So imagine if you're driving around in your Tesla and all of a sudden just stops. Or they wind up driving you somewhere you don't want to go. That's another reason not to buy a Tesla. So those stations, those ground referencing stations, are the reason why modern GNS systems maintain such high accuracy. The problem is we don't have nearly as many of those as China does, which means their technology is superior to ours. So what about that soft power we talked about? Soft power is simply a nation's ability to influence other countries through ideas, cultural culture rather, technology, and values rather than through military force or economic pressure. So today, both the United States and China use artificial intelligence, right? They use digital platforms, they use open source technology. They use that to shape opinions, to build partnerships, to expand global influence. Remember how President Trump is always trying to get nations to invest in our AI program? How he's looked to build all this AI infrastructure here? Well, that's all because he wants to gain soft power. Influence is really what it is. Um, if you don't have the latest, most powerful, most accurate systems, you lose soft power. You lose global influence. Another part of that is participating in UN peacekeeping missions, right? Offering humanitarian aid, promoting infrastructure diplomacy. When you're a world superpower, you get to negotiate how all those things are done. We've done it for years. Well, today, a superpower is not only measured by its financial and military might, it's also measured by its technological advancements. And China is starting to go ahead of the pack. It's expanding its influence or its soft power through more than military strength. It's expanding it through technology partnerships, which is what they're offering these countries, through infrastructure investment, through global media, through AI development, through cultural outreach. I don't know who wants, I mean, culturally, they're communist. So if you want a piece of that, I guess that's attractive to you. Through the satellite navigation system and through economic cooperation. So that just illustrates how you can win favor with other countries without military intervention. There's even talks with Canada to provide advantages to them that the United States can no longer provide. You know, it's like paying protection money to the mob when you start dealing with China. It's really what it's like. You're paying protection money to the mob. Once they have you in their grasp, they can. It's like Russia. We'll just cut off the heat. We'll stop getting the food. You're going to do what we say, no matter what. So, what about United States control? Um, we've used our GPS basically the same way to achieve a global monopoly. Um, we've used it to establish economic dominance. So we really can't look at China now and say, well, you can't do that because we've done it for years. GPS has given the United States a military and strategic advantage that I don't think we have anymore. It's enabled us to conduct precision targeting on different targets, right? We could put a missile right through somebody's window and not touch the rest of the building. They have the ability to block that now once this advances a little further. So GPS dominated by the United States is no longer, well, we are slowly moving toward that no longer being a possibility. We are going to lose our ability to jam signals before we go into a place like Iran. And that's exactly what gave us the air superiority in Iran, was our ability to jam their signals. So GPS has given the United States a monopoly on satellite navigation for decades, but that may be coming to a close. So how does that affect our allies or those that we have sworn to protect, like Taiwan, right? So as you may know, Taiwan is a major producer of semiconductors. Semiconductors are used in satellites. China wants more satellites. Taiwan also has the rare earth materials used to build these semiconductors. So that's why China is so interested in Taiwan. Taiwan has become a major target for China. Well, with GPS or their Beidou system being superior to ours, that may prevent us from even being able to protect Taiwan from a Chinese invasion. What about Greenland? Why do you think we're so interested in Greenland? That also contains large deposits of minerals used to build semiconductors, specifically gallium, germanium, and rare earth elements. Sites like the Tambrise project hold massive untapped reserves of those critical elements. And so there's plenty of it there. That's why he's so interested. It's more, it's not an aggressive thing, it's more of a strategic military thing. Modern civilization, whether we like it or not, depends on technology today that didn't exist decades ago, like satellite navigation. Listen, you want to go back to using handheld maps? I wouldn't mind, but there's a couple generations that would be lost, absolutely lost. If you had to pull out a map and actually plan out your route, nobody'd be going anywhere. Artificial intelligence, it's here to stay, and it's only going to get more embedded in our culture. Semiconductor manufacturing wasn't even a thing a decade ago. Rare earth minerals, who would ever thought? And then space-based communications. Why do you think we have a space force now? For that very purpose. Because we know going forward that war is going to be fought in space. We're talking Star Wars stuff here. So the competition for these technologies explains the growing interest in places like Taiwan because of their semiconductor manufacturing, Greenland because of their rare earth minerals, strategic satellite systems, and deep ocean military mapping. Do you know that there's a battle going on right now for the Mariana Trench? The deepest part of the ocean, there's a battle. They're planting flags in the Mariana Trench because of the minerals that exist there. Now, listen, as you read through your Bible, none of these technologies are mentioned specifically, are they? But they do demonstrate how nations are increasingly competing for resources, for infrastructure that will support future global control and conflicts. So what does that mean for us as believers? Well, I'm going to stop the recording right here.